Hello and welcome to another edition of the How To series. I'm John Lofstock with C-Store Decisions and the National Advisory Group, and I'm pleased today to be joined by Dan Varroney, who is the president and CEO of Potomac Core, a strategic consulting firm that specializes in association transformation and industry-focused strategic partnerships. Dan is also a supply chain expert, and everyone is, especially our retailer friends, are very familiar with what's going on in the supply chain and the challenges. So I'm proud to welcome Dan, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the supply chain. Hey, Dan, how you doing?
John, thank you so much for having me here on your podcast. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you.
Thank you. You and I spoke offline a little bit about the supply chain. That's kind of one of your specialties. Convenience stores are struggling to get product. It's been that way, and it's affecting everything, not just retail sales. It's affecting hard goods and raw materials to produce baked items, to produce sandwiches, etc. Can you tell us a little bit about the supply chain issues you're seeing in C-stores, and maybe what we could expect over the next 6 months?
Sure, I'm happy to do so. So let me first offer that the supply chain challenge is countrywide. So when a consumer goes into a food store, they're not seeing the products that they used to see. So for all of the retail stores that your organization serves, here's what it looks like. Timely product availability and pricing is what it's all about. So all of your stores are likely not able to get the same level of branded products that they once did. And on top of that, it may not be as timely as it did. They're probably facing some empty shelves, and they're looking at that for the foreseeable future. And the challenge is we're facing the laws of supply and demand. Demand is far exceeding supply, and at some point that needs to be reconciled. But because of the increased demand and the lack of supply, we are suffering higher prices, and the consumers that are going into all the retail stores are seeing higher prices. Another complicating factor of that, especially as we look at the overall economy, there's two other complicating factors. One is the cost of energy. And you all recognize that as you're selling gasoline to consumers. But there's another part of that cost of energy that the convenience stores are seeing. So they have a cost of operating the coolers and the freezers, the electricity to keep the lights on, the electricity to pump the gasoline. They're paying higher prices there. What most industries are still coming to terms with, and what consumers really don't see, is that industry has a spillover effect throughout our entire economy. Your convenience store affiliates are feeling this directly at different levels. It's first higher energy prices, and then the lack of availability of product. Now, let me add something else onto that. So there's the Ukrainian situation. Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of Europe. Now, if the war continues, the conflict continues, there could be a challenge in terms of whether or not those crops are going to be planted. If they're not planted, where is Europe going to get its supply of wheat to make the baked goods? That may create another challenge and further increase prices in the baked goods arena. So what I wanted to do up front was really set the table, John, because this is a challenge we're all dealing with, and we're looking at upward pricing pressure for as long or as far as the eye can see. So I wanted to be fully transparent on that on the front end.
I have been reading some stories about the production of crops, and no one's really talking about it yet for the most part. It's still kind of under the radar, but it's going to become an enormous issue here in the coming months if certain parameters aren't met.
I am telling you, it is going to become an issue. It is going to become an issue.
So one of the things that you promote is reimaging. And as you can see over shoulder, reimaging industry growth, reimaging the supply chain, and that you really believe that it's time to just do things a little different. So why don't you tell us about some of the things, or how the supply chain could be imaged, and some of the things industry is not just our retail, our C-store retail industry, but retail in general could do better.
So actually it's reimagining. We're looking at reimagining. So interestingly enough, we live in the most productive, most innovative economy in the world. And at the same time, we've got supply chains that are incredibly siloed. The challenge related to the supply chain, the cost of energy, and inflation, industries need to come together in a more collaborative way as an industry unit throughout the supply chain, and they need to reimagine supply chains. So what do I mean by that? So currently today, think of, going back to the 1980s when this notion of just-in-time manufacturing was instituted, all kinds of certifications and qualifications around just-in-time. Except there was another side to that, which is just in case. There were never any fail-safes. We never envisioned a global pandemic. We never envisioned a supply chain challenge to the extent that we have today. And we clearly didn't envision a conflict on the other side of the world. What this calls for is reimagination. What I mean by that is we want to have an industry, like, for example, the baking industry, that has begun to reimagine the way it does things. It unites the entire food supply chain through a food and beverage industry alliance. And what they do is they come together, they identify all the various challenges they face, and they look at the way in which they can coordinate communications, the way in which they can coordinate their advocacy efforts with all levels of governmental officials, and shape the external environment and make it more favorable. So let me give you an example of what I mean of reimagination. And this is important to the convenience store. So I want you to just turn back the clock 24 months and quickly, what happened is the Centers for Disease Control and the Food and Drug Administration ordered the shutdown and forgot that we still all needed to eat. So the American Bakers Association and a leadership group of other food industry trade associations banded together and said, we need to come up with a strategy whereby we can go to the Centers for Disease Control and the Food and Drug Administration and build worker safety protocols to keep plants opening, keep delivery open, and continue the supply of food moving forward. Bottom line is, because of that active reimagination, all the American people were able to keep eating. But we need to be thinking about how we can put together large groups of people, vast ecosystems, where we can use a trade association as a neutral integrator, where people can work inside these trade associations on pre-competitive issues and solutions and build strategies that can help us break the logjam in the supply chains and create a more favorable environment.
Now, technology, I would imagine, is going to play a key role in all of this. So can you talk a little bit about the role technology is playing in chain management, both how it played before the pandemic and how it's playing out now post-pandemic?
So when you look at it pre-pandemic, supply chain transparency was an issue. Mm-hmm. What technology is doing and has done and is continuing to evolve is about greater transparency and availability of products. So when we look at the supply chain today, what's different, let's say from 10 years ago, is we've got technology to help us better track where products are. Mm-hmm. So that's a significant game change.
And we've talked a little bit about cost, and both in the last few minutes and before we began, the impact that the supply chain has on the nation, on inflation, on GDP growth is staggering. And it's going to, inflation is going to keep going up if we keep having these problems, isn't it?
Yes. So today, the monthly jobs numbers came out for February, and an interesting thing happened. Clearly, there were 433,000 new jobs created, but something else happened. So inside those numbers, wages increased by 5.5%, and inflation is at 8%. So when you look at wages and inflation, how are workers going to keep up, especially when you've got 64% of our population working from paycheck to paycheck? So it's a big challenge. It's an enormous challenge.
Yeah, and we see things now. Chicago, the cities are talking about giving away gas cards and giving away things to ease the pain. I don't know if that's going to help. If you keep giving it away, isn't that just going to keep driving up inflation as costs go up?
So essentially, when you think about it, so the immediate direct answer to your question is yes. So if you're going to artificially drive demand, you're going to further reduce supply. The more you reduce supply, the more you increase price. And that's where the inflation comes from.
So you talked about a national resilient supply chain strategy. So talk a little bit more about why these are essential for our industry, our nation, long-term security in getting products, our long-term health, and ultimately our long-term economic prosperity. Getting back to pre-pandemic levels when sales seem to be coming along pretty good.
You know, what's interesting, I just said a few minutes ago that we live in the most innovative and productive economy in the world. We also have the best capital market system in the world as well. What's interesting and somewhat ironic is that we've got a supply chain system that isn't as durable. So this is a call to action. I want you to look at it in these terms historically. So back in 1961, President Kennedy said that we're going to send a man to the moon and return them safely to the earth within 10 years or in 10 years. Actually did it within 10 years. The spillover effect in the rest of the economy was absolutely dramatic. I see building resilient supply chains as the next moonshot. If we crack this problem, it will unleash waves of productivity that we don't even see today. But that can only come if industries band together, build these ecosystems and these strategic partnerships through these trade associations to reimagine these approaches. So, for example, some of what your members are seeing today is they've got products coming in from offshore. You were just out in California. How many ships with containers loaded with product are still sitting offshore in California? So the issue is, what can we do to reshore or nearshore? So as your industry thinks about a new and different future, how might they create those opportunities to reshore and nearshore and create fail-safe options? I'm guessing what your industry would find especially attractive 5 years from now, first of all, is not having this challenge again, but secondly, having fail-safe options.
So if I were to have all our main distributors and wholesalers and maybe NACS or National Trade Association for the industry here right now with us, and we were just kind of brainstorming, what would be your first piece of advice to them?
Well, my first piece of advice would start with questions. What are your biggest challenges? Where do you source your products? Is there any way you can shorten the distance of the supply chain? Are there regulatory or legislative barriers standing in the way of doing that? Are there any regulatory or legislative barriers standing in the way of reshoring or nearshoring some of your supply chains as an industry?
Okay. So for the retailers now, the end user of all these products, what should they be doing? What kind of conversations should they be having, and who should they be having them with?
So if you're looking at creating an ecosystem, I want you to think of the raw materials, the producers, and then the logistics people, and then the convenience stores. What is it that they need to do together to create a more favorable environment? What is it they need to do to strengthen supply chains as an industry? Now, we're not talking on a competitive basis. We're looking for pre-competitive solutions. We want to get all these parties around the same table and say, these are the 1, 2, or 3 biggest challenges. How do we leverage our collective strength to solve these problems, address these challenges, and create a more favorable environment for us?
You know, you mentioned something. I want to go back to
Sure.
The products that are sitting on piers and in docks and warehouses. How prevalent is that problem? We hear a lot about it, but just how bad is it?
It's really bad. I mean, when you look at the ships parked at different ports in California, there's a lot of ships and containers sitting offshore. It's still bad. Now, is it better? Yes. But have we broken the logjam yet? No, we haven't. So I want to talk about one issue in particular, especially in light of your convenience stores. So there's an issue in the industry, and especially in logistics, which is an hours of service regulation. So why is there a bottleneck at these ports? Part of it is is you've got to get products shipped from the ports out to your convenience stores or out to their distributors. So there are federal regulations that mandates a certain number of hours. So here we are in an economy, by the way, that still has 11 million open jobs. And we've got a situation by which we don't have enough truckers to deliver products, either directly to your retail stores or to distributors. So if that's the case, why don't we get a waiver of a federal regulation that would say, well, that can allow our truckers to drive more hours? Those types of things. So that would be an example, by the way, of pre-competitive solutions.
So you just set up my next question for you. Why don't we get a waiver to do all this? I mean, has it been talked about? Are people trying?
There are industries that are still working on it, still advocating and lobbying the administration to get that hours of service regulation waived. It's a significant opportunity because I think it doesn't break a complete logjam, but it plays a role in alleviating some of the logjam.
And it must help consumer confidence. It'll start to make people feel better, not to, be thinking all the time that they're not going to be able to get the stuff they need. And we're starting to see these pictures from like the Ukraine and Russia where there is no food on the shelves, and people are starting to equate the two, and it creates panic.
John, what's interesting, I think sometimes what we don't say, and sometimes leaders don't necessarily understand, is how unsettling it is to walk into any store and see empty shelves. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's something that we are all very accustomed to. And you know what it creates? It's that lack of stability, that lack of continuity that we always had in this country. That's why fixing the supply chains and doing them through these ecosystems in an active, significant reimagination is a national priority.
And we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot in that the product, or a good portion of the product, is available. It's just sitting there with no access to it. And that's inexcusable, really.
Again, when you think about a country that is the most innovative and productive in the world, it does cause you to ponder and to wonder why it hasn't been addressed in a more comprehensive way. So now that I've said that, I want to be clear on something. So it's not for the federal government to fix this. It's for industries to fix it. Because what we want is this. We want collaboration that leads to innovative solutions. Collaboration leading to innovative solutions. What we do want to do is create a partnership with federal, state, and local government that opens the doors to leverage and implement this innovation.
Mm-hmm. It's a good time right now. Like you said, there's 11 million open jobs. There are people looking for work. It seems that this is a big puzzle that someone needs to put together to get the right pieces in place.
One of the outgrowths of this pandemic is that a number of people have rethought their priorities and how they want to work and what the quality of their own lives are. I think what's important for every industry is to really think through what it is they can do to build bonds, not just with current workers, but with future workers, to attract them and make them feel like they're part of their community. Mm-hmm.
All right. So I want to, there are a couple other things I want to mention. We talked about a little bit about the labor market and staffing the stores and the products. So there really is a shortage throughout the entire retail industry. Do you think that the retailers need to take a different approach, or what do you think retailers should be doing at this point? Is it really just trying to go with what they have? Do they acknowledge that there's supply chain shortage? Do they change their business?
So I think there are short-term solutions, and I think there are long-term opportunities. Mm-hmm. I believe there are short-term solutions in terms of partnerships with a number of different suppliers. I think also what your convenience stores really need to do is to build a long-term strategy in order to make this industry far more durable than it is today.
Mm-hmm. No question. And I take it that's what some of your book is about. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the book and how our listeners can get it and read it and learn a little bit more about what you do?
Sure. So my book, published by Wiley Publishing in Hoboken, New Jersey, is called Reimaging Industry Growth. I wrote this book to really demonstrate how these strategic partnerships between industries and trade associations can add enormous value. When I looked at industries, specifically the recreational boating industry or the frozen food industry, these strategic partnerships delivered accretive growth for industries. These are very effective because the trade association becomes the strategic business unit of the industry. Through advocacy, it shapes in a policy way the external environment, makes it more favorable for industries. In addition, these relationships can also help promote industries and the value of industries, the value of working in those industries. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to write this book, especially as we're coming out of the pandemic, to identify a new and different way to imagine and really reimagine industry growth. The challenges are big. The more we build ecosystems throughout our value chain and our supply chain, the stronger we're going to be, the more durable we're going to be in terms of positioning for long-term growth. What I do is I lead a company called Potomac Core Consulting, based here in the greater Washington, D.C. area. And next month will be 10 years old. We deliver strategic industry planning solutions, and we help build these industry partnerships. So I would encourage everyone to do two things. One, you can go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble and look for Reimagining Industry Growth, order the book and read it. And then begin to reimagine how you would industry growth by engaging your industry trade association. And then secondly, you can go to my company website. It's potomaccore.com. And there's more about the book on the website. You can also click on any of the links on the website to order the book as well.
And I'll be happy to share your contact information with any of our listeners that would be interested. And you mentioned the baking and the frozen food industries. Those are two industries that C-stores and our industry in general has benefited from them elevating their game. And, as more baking goods and more frozen foods become available, the C-stores are able to do a whole lot more in terms of selling and producing fresh food. So it's been a good role model or a good roadmap for C-stores to follow.
Well, I think your C-stores will especially enjoy the case studies on the baking industry and the frozen food industry. I know they will especially appreciate those.
Great. So thanks, Dan. Again, author of Reimagining Industry Growth. And I am John Lofstock. I want to thank Dan again for joining us and learning a little bit more. And I've kind of hooked Dan into writing a column for the magazine. So you'll be able to get a little more familiar with his work and get a real good understanding of how he can help our industry and help our retailers solve the supply chain issues. Dan, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, and look forward to writing the column.
I look forward to working with you some more. All right, everyone, have a good afternoon, and thanks again for tuning in. Talk to you soon.